Mongolia, 1922. The Gobi Desert stretches for 1,000 miles in every direction, a sea of sand and stone where summer temperatures crack 100 degrees and winter nights drop to 40 below zero. Into this hostile expanse rides a convoy of Dodge motorcars, modified for terrain that no automobile was designed to cross. At their head is Roy Chapman Andrews, paleontologist, explorer, and the man who will one day inspire the character of Indiana Jones. Andrews has come looking for the origins of humanity. He believes the high plateau of Central Asia may hold fossils that will rewrite the story of human evolution. What he finds instead will rewrite the story of mythology. His team unearths bones, massive bones, skulls with hollow eye sockets and jaws lined with teeth like curved daggers, vertebrae the size of dinner plates, claws that could disembowel a horse. The fossils emerge from the red sandstone in quantities that stagger the expedition. Crate after crate of prehistoric remains, more than any single dig has ever produced. But the local Mongolians are not surprised. They have a name for these remains, a name their ancestors have used for thousands of years. They call them Long Gu, dragon bones. Andrews didn't discover dragons. He discovered something far stranger, evidence that dragons had been discovered before. Thousands of years before Darwin, before Cuvier, before anyone understood that creatures could go extinct, ancient peoples walked these same desert valleys and found the same bones jutting from the rock. They had no concept of dinosaurs, no framework of paleontology, no word for millions of years. They had only their eyes, their hands, and their capacity for wonder. They held these skulls, ran their fingers along teeth that had bitten nothing for 65 million years, and did the only thing humans can do when confronted with the incomprehensible. They told stories. And here is the mystery that will occupy us for the next 3 hours. Every culture on Earth told the same story. Not similar stories. Not stories with vague resemblances. The same story. A creature of scales and terrible power. A serpent grown vast beyond imagining. A monster that flew, or swam, or coiled in the dark places of the world, waiting. The Babylonians carved dragons into the gates of their cities, glazed in brilliant blue, their serpentine bodies running along the walls that guarded the world's first metropolis. The Chinese wove them into the robes of emperors, and for 4,000 years, only the Son of Heaven could wear the 5-clawed dragon. The Norse warned that a dragon named Nidhogger gnawed eternally at the roots of the great world tree, and another serpent, Jörmungandr, grew so vast that it encircled the entire ocean, tail in its mouth, waiting for the day it would rise and devour the gods themselves. The Aztecs worshipped a feathered serpent who brought wisdom and wind. The Slavs feared a 3-headed monster who breathed fire and demanded tribute. The Welsh told of 2 dragons locked in eternal combat beneath a king's collapsing castle. The Indians revered cobras grown to divine size, coiled beneath the throne of Vishnu. Different continents, different millennia, different languages that never touched, cultures that never traded, peoples separated by oceans and ice ages and 10,000 generations of divergent evolution. And yet they all invented the same creature, scaled, serpentine, impossibly powerful. A monster with wings or without, with fire or venom, with one head or many, but always recognizable, always the same essential shape. What makes the dragon unique? Vampires are European. Werewolves cluster around the forests of the old world. Yokai stay in Japan. Jinn belong to the desert. Even the most widespread myths have boundaries, cultural fingerprints that mark their origin. But dragons are everywhere. There is no corner of the inhabited world, no island in the Pacific, no village in the Amazon, no settlement above the Arctic Circle. where humans did not look into the darkness and see the dragon looking back. Why? What is it about the human mind that needs this particular monster? What fear runs so deep, so ancient, so universal, that every civilization independently gave it the same form? And if the dragon is merely a figment of our imagination, why did every imagination produce the same figment? And here is the deeper question. In an age of satellites and gene sequencing, in a world where we have mapped every inch of the planet and catalogued every species that walks or crawls or flies, we still tell dragon stories. We put them in our movies, our games, our children's books. We dream of them. We name our sports teams after them, tattoo them on our skin, and watch television shows where they burn cities. We know dragons don't exist, and yet we can't stop believing in them. This is a documentary about the most persistent creature in human imagination, a beast that predates writing, that appears in the oldest stories we have carved into clay and painted on cave walls, and that shows no signs of disappearing, no matter how much we learn about the world. We will travel from the temples of Babylon to the mountains of Wales, from the rice paddies of Vietnam to the pyramids of Mexico. We will read creation myths where dragons are the raw material of the universe, and hero stories where slaying them is the ultimate test of courage. We will meet emperors who claim descent from dragons and saints who built their legends on destroying them. We will follow the trail of bones that Roy Chapman Andrews found in the Gobi, the same bones that Chinese doctors had been grinding into medicine, the bones that made an entire civilization certain that dragons were real. And we will ask the question that no one seems able to answer. If dragons never existed, why does every human culture act as if they did? By the end, you will understand what dragons really are. You will understand why the same monster haunts the dreams of people who have never met, speak different languages, and live on opposite sides of the planet. And you will understand why we will never, can never, stop believing in them. The word comes from the Greek, drakon. It meant serpent, but also something more specific, something that set this serpent apart from all others. The word derives from derkastai, to see, to look sharply, to fix with a piercing gaze. The drakon was the serpent that watched, the one that saw you before you saw it. In Greek mythology, the drakon guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides. It coiled around the golden fleece in Colchis. It lurked at the oracle of Delphi before Apollo slew it and claimed the shrine. Always watching, always present at the threshold between worlds. This etymology tells us something important about what dragons originally were. Not fire breathers, not winged terrors from the sky, but something that lurked in the shadows and waited. Something with eyes that gleamed in the dark. The original dragon was a serpent with consciousness, a beast that could think, a predator that studied its prey before it struck. The Romans borrowed the word, softening it to Draco. The meaning remained the same, a great serpent, a creature of immense size and unknowable power. When Roman legions marched into battle, they carried standards topped with hollow dragon heads that caught the wind and screamed, their fabric bodies writhing behind them like the tail of a living beast. The Parthian cavalry who invented these standards believed the dragon's scream would terrify enemy horses. The Romans adopted them, and for centuries, the Draco led legions across Europe, Africa, and Asia. The enemy heard them coming before they saw the soldiers. In Old English, the word was worm. The same word meant worm, snake, and dragon, because to the Anglo-Saxons, these were not separate categories of creature, but points on a single spectrum. A worm was a legless thing that moved through the earth or water, that coiled and struck, that was ancient and cold-blooded, and very, very patient. Beowulf's final enemy is called a worm. So are the serpents in the Garden of Eden in Old English translations. The boundary between dragon and snake was not a wall, but a blur. And this tells us something about how our ancestors understood these creatures. They did not distinguish between the literal serpent in the grass and the mythic serpent that guarded treasure. Both were worm. Both were dangerous. The only difference was scale. Half a world away, the Chinese called their great serpent long. The word bears no relation to the Greek or the Latin, no etymological ancestor that connects East and West. The Chinese did not borrow this concept from Mediterranean traders or learn it from Indian merchants crossing the Silk Road. This was an independent invention, a separate naming of the same fundamental shape. And yet the creature they described shared essential features with its Western counterpart. It was serpentine. It was powerful. It commanded the forces of nature. The differences would come later, in what the dragon meant and what it could do. But the shape, that long, coiling, scaled body, was recognizable on both sides of the world. This is the first mystery of dragons. Before they could fly, before they could breathe fire, before they became enemies or allies of humanity, they were serpents. The dragon began as a snake writ large. And the question we must answer is, why the snake? Of all the creatures our ancestors could have magnified into myth, why this one? The question is why? Why would every culture on Earth start with the same image? Anthropologist David E. Jones proposed an answer in his 2000 book, An Instinct for Dragons. He argued that the dragon is not a creature we invented, but a creature we remembered, a composite of every predator that hunted our ancestors on the African savanna. Think about what kills a primate. Snakes, with their venom and their crushing coils, hiding in the grass, dropping from trees, waiting in the darkness of caves. Big cats, leopards, lions, cheetahs, with their teeth and their claws and their terrifying ability to drop from branches without warning. And raptors, the great eagles and hawks that circle overhead, shadowbringers capable of snatching an infant from its mother's arms before she could scream. But there is another theory, one that requires no evolutionary psychology, no circuits in the brain, just bones. Adrienne Mayer is a historian of ancient science at Stanford University. She has spent decades studying what ancient peoples did when they encountered fossils, and her conclusion is simple: they made up stories. In her books, The First Fossil Hunters and Fossil Legends of the First Americans, Mayer documents case after case of ancient peoples finding dinosaur bones and interpreting them as evidence of legendary creatures. When Greek farmers plowing their fields unearthed the skull of a protoceratops, a beaked dinosaur with a bony frill that flourished 70 million years ago, they had no framework for understanding what they had found. They called it a griffin. When Scythian nomads discovered the same skulls in the Gobi Desert, they saw a creature with an eagle's beak and a lion's body. When Chinese peasants unearthed the vertebrae of a sauropod, these fossils were ground into powder and sold as medicine. Traditional Chinese pharmacies were selling dinosaur fossils as dragon bone remedies well into the 20th century. Perhaps the truth is that dragons have many origins. The serpent was already sacred, already feared, before humans were human. Snakes appear in the oldest art we have, carved into bone and painted on cave walls. They shed their skins and seem to be reborn. They emerge from the earth as if from another world. They bring death with a single bite. The serpent was the first symbol, and the dragon is what happens when that symbol grows, when it absorbs other fears and other powers, when generations of storytellers add wings and fire and intelligence until the simple snake becomes something far more complex. The fossils gave the dragon bones. The predator circuits gave it claws. The snake gave it form. And something else, something we have not yet named, gave it meaning. Because if dragons were only fear, they would have faded when the fears faded. We no longer die of snakebite in significant numbers. We do not get snatched by eagles. The leopards are in zoos. And yet the dragon remains. It remains because it became more than the sum of its fears. What it became, and why that mattered, is the story of the next 5,000 years. Before there was a world, there was water. The Babylonians told this story 3,000 years ago, pressing it into clay tablets in the ancient script called cuneiform. They called their creation epic, the Enuma Elish, when on high, and it began in darkness, in an endless ocean where two beings moved through the deep. This was not allegory to them. This was history. This was how everything started. Apsu was the fresh water, the sweet water that bubbled up from springs and ran in rivers, the water that made crops grow and cities possible. Tiamat was the salt sea, the vast and terrible ocean that surrounded the known world, the water that swallowed ships and drowned the unwary. They were lovers, these two, and from their mingling came the first gods, younger, louder, brasher than their parents. But the gods were too loud. They danced and shouted and churned the waters with their endless movement. And Apsu, the ancient fresh water, grew tired of their noise. He wanted silence. He wanted the stillness of the deep before his children had disturbed it. And so he plotted to destroy them all, to return the cosmos to the peace of the uncreated. The gods learned of his plan, and the gods, being gods, killed him first. They struck down their father and made their homes in his body. But Apsu had a wife, and his wife still lived. And Tiamat wept. Then she raged. The mother of gods became the enemy of gods. Grief turned to fury, and fury became purpose. She took a new consort, Kingu, a god who had sided with her, and around his neck she hung the Tablet of Destinies, the artifact that gave its bearer supreme power over fate itself. Then she set about creating an army. 11 terrible creatures emerged from her will, giant serpents filled with venom, scorpion men with human torsos and arachnid bodies, fishmen, storm demons, rabid dogs, and at their head, the creatures called Mush-Hu-Shu, serpent dragons with the forelegs of lions and the hind legs of eagles, their forked tongues flickering, their eyes reflecting no light. The gods needed a champion. They looked among themselves and found only fear. One by one, the elder gods refused the challenge. They had seen Tiamat's army. They had glimpsed her form rising from the deep. But there was one god young enough to lack the memory of Tiamat's original power, and ambitious enough not to care. Marduk, the storm god of Babylon, fierce and hungry for glory, stepped forward. He would fight Tiamat on one condition. If he won, he would become king of all the gods. They would bow to him forever. Desperate, they agreed. They gave him weapons, 4 winds that he could trap in a net, a mace of unyielding stone, a bow that shot not arrows, but lightning itself. They clothed him in terror and armed him with inevitability. And then, alone, he went to meet his grandmother. The battle was cosmic. Tiamat opened her jaws wide enough to swallow cities, and Marduk sent the 4 winds howling down her throat. Her body inflated like a bladder. She could not close her mouth. And while she struggled, helpless, Marduk shot an arrow through the opening, through her distended throat. straight into her heart. She died. The first great dragon died, and what happened next changed everything. What Marduk did next is the point of the story. He split Tiamat's body in two. The upper half he stretched across the sky to become the heavens, fixing the stars in her flesh. The lower half he pressed down to become the earth. Her eyes became the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Her tail, bent upward, became the Milky Way. From her spittle, he made the clouds. From her venom, he made fog and mist. The world is made of dragon. The dragon is the raw material of creation. Tiamat is chaos transformed, not chaos destroyed. The act of creation is the act of giving shape to the shapeless, of imposing order on the primordial waters. The dragon is what order is made from. 1,000 miles east, around the same era, a remarkably similar story was being told. The Rig Veda, the oldest Hindu scripture, composed perhaps 1,500 years before Christ, in a language that would evolve into Sanskrit, describes a cosmic battle between the storm god Indra and a serpent called Vrtra. Vrtra's name means the obstacle or the enveloper, and that is precisely what he was. A dragon who had coiled himself around all the waters of the world, every river blocked, every rain cloud held captive, the earth cracking under drought, while a great serpent hoarded the waters that could save it. Vrtra did not attack. He simply withheld. He wrapped his coils around the clouds and refused to let them weep. The world died of thirst, while the dragon slept. Indra, king of the gods, took up the Vajra, a thunderbolt forged by the craftsman god Tvastar, harder than any substance, crackling with the power of storms. He found Vrtra in the mountains where the waters were imprisoned, and he struck. 99 times, Indra's Vajra fell. 99 coils shattered, and on the final blow, the dragon split apart, and the waters burst free. Rivers roared down from the mountains. Rain fell on parched earth. The world, held hostage, was finally released. Here again, the dragon is chaos. Not chaos as active destruction, but chaos as blockage, as the withholding of life. And here again, the act of slaying is the act of creation, or at least of liberation. The world cannot function while the dragon lives. Order requires violence against what came before. In Egypt, the battle was not a single event. It happened every night. Ra, the sun god, creator of all things, had to die each evening. His golden bark sank below the western horizon, and for 12 hours, he traveled through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a place of darkness and danger where the rules of the living world did not apply. And waiting for him in the deepest hour of night was Apep, called Apophis by the Greeks, and fear incarnate by the Egyptians themselves. Apep was vast. Some texts describe him as miles long, large enough to swallow the sun whole. He was the serpent of uncreation, the embodiment of chaos, the force that existed before Ra brought light and order to the cosmos. His only desire was to return the universe to the darkness from which it came. Every night, he coiled in the narrowest passage of the underworld and waited for Ra's bark to approach. Every night, Ra and his divine crew fought him. Sometimes they burned him. Sometimes they cut him into pieces. Sometimes Set, the god of chaos and violence, stood at the prow and drove a spear through his immortal head. But Apep never stayed dead. By the following evening, he had reformed, whole, hungry, waiting in the darkness once more. The Egyptian dragon is not a creature that can be permanently defeated. He is a principle that must be endured. Chaos is never destroyed. It is held at bay, night after night, for as long as the sun must rise. The battle is eternal because entropy is eternal. Order only survives through constant vigilance. And in Persia, the dragon wore a human face. The Avesta, the scripture of Zoroastrianism, speaks of Asi-Dahaka. The name means serpent Dahaka, and he was both dragon and tyrant. In later Persian legend, he became Zahak, a human king cursed with two serpents that grew from his shoulders. These serpents could not be cut off. They regenerated instantly, and they were always hungry. Every day, the serpents demanded food, the brains of two young men, freshly killed. For 1,000 years, Zahak ruled Persia, and for 1,000 years, parents wept as their sons were taken to feed the serpent king's hunger. This is the dragon as political metaphor, as the tyrant who devours his people. The story ends not with Zahak's death, but with his imprisonment. The hero Feridun chains him inside Mount Damavand, where he waits still, alive and raging, until the end of the world, when he will break free and chaos will return. 4 civilizations, 4 dragons, and a pattern. In every case, the dragon is the thing that was here before us. Tiamat preceded the gods. Vertra blocked the waters before the rains. Apep waited in the darkness before the sun. Asi-Dahaka ruled before the just king came. The dragon is the old order, the primordial state, the chaos that must be overcome for civilization to exist. But notice what else these stories share. The dragon is never purely evil. Tiamat was a mother who loved her husband and mourned his death. Vertra held the waters, not out of malice, but simply because that was his nature. Apep regenerates because chaos cannot be permanently destroyed. Zahak waits in the mountain because even gods cannot kill what he represents. The dragon is not the opposite of the world. The dragon is what the world was made from. Not all dragons were slain. While the Babylonians told of Tiamat's dismemberment and the Egyptians fought Apep each night, another civilization was developing a very different relationship with its serpents. In India, the dragon was not an enemy to be conquered, but a god to be worshipped. The Nagas. The word comes from Sanskrit and means simply serpent, but these were no ordinary snakes. The Nagas were divine beings, part human, part cobra, capable of shifting between forms at will. They ruled their own kingdoms beneath the earth and at the bottom of rivers, in a realm called Patala, a place of jeweled palaces and infinite treasure. Their kings wore crowns. Their princesses married human heroes. They possessed wisdom so ancient and so deep that even the gods consulted them. This is a different dragon. This is the serpent as ally, as teacher, as the keeper of secrets beyond mortal reach to discover on their own. And this version of the myth spread across half the world. Shesha is the most important, also called Ananta, which means the Endless One. Shesha is the serpent upon which the god Vishnu sleeps between the cycles of creation. He has 1,000 heads, each a cobra hood spread wide, and his coiled body forms the bed upon which the preserver of the universe rests during the long nights when the cosmos does not exist. When Vishnu dreams, universes are born. When he wakes, they end. And through all of it, Shesha supports him, patient and eternal, the foundation upon which reality rests. In this mythology, the serpent is not chaos. The serpent is stability. The serpent is what remains when everything else has dissolved back into the void. The serpent is infinite. Then there is Vasuki. Vasuki is the king of the Nagas, and he played a central role in one of Hinduism's most important myths, the Samudra Manthan, the churning of the cosmic ocean. The story goes like this. The gods and their enemies, the Asuras, agreed to work together just once. They would churn the primordial ocean of milk to extract Amrita, the nectar of immortality. To do this, they needed a churning rod, so they used Mount Mandara, one of the world's great mountains. They needed a rope, so they used Vasuki, the Serpent King, wrapping his vast body around the mountain. For 1,000 years, gods and demons pulled Vasuki back and forth, churning the cosmic ocean, while Vishnu, transformed into a giant turtle, supported the mountain on his back. From the foam rose wonders, the moon, the wish-fulfilling cow, the goddess of fortune, the divine physician, and also Halahala, a poison so deadly that it would have destroyed all existence if Shiva had not swallowed it and held it in his throat, which is why his neck turned blue. The serpent was the instrument of creation. His suffering, the pain of being pulled back and forth for an eternity, was necessary for the universe to gain its treasures. When Buddhism spread east from India, it carried the Nagas with it. One of the most beloved images in Buddhist art shows the Buddha in meditation, while a great storm rages around him. A cobra named Mukalinda, king of a local Naga tribe, emerged from the earth and coiled his body beneath the meditating Buddha, raising his seven-headed hood to shelter the enlightened one from the rain. The Buddha, deep in contemplation, never noticed the storm, and Mukalinda held him safe until it passed. This is the dragon as protector, as devotee, as the creature who recognizes enlightenment and serves it without being asked. And this image, the Buddha sheltered by the serpent, traveled with Buddhism into Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Indonesia. In the temples of Angkor, Nagas form the balustrades of causeways. In Thai art, they guard the roofs of monasteries. In Laotian legend, they shape the course of the Mekong River itself. The serpent that Marduk butchered, that Indra shattered, that Ra burns nightly in the underworld, these Eastern traditions crowned it instead, gave it jewels and kingdoms, and a place in the structure of the sacred. But the Nagas have enemies too. Garuda, the divine eagle, king of birds, mount of Vishnu himself, despises serpents with an eternal hatred. The myths explain this as ancestral. Garuda's mother was enslaved by the Naga's mother, and Garuda swore vengeance. He hunts them, devours them, and is depicted in art with serpents clutched in his talons or writhing in his beak. This enmity encodes something real, the ancient war between raptors and reptiles that David E. Jones identified as one of the sources of our dragon fear. The eagle and the serpent, battling since the dinosaurs died. In India, both are divine, but they remain locked in eternal conflict. The Nagas guard treasure, hold wisdom, support the universe, protect the Buddha. And yet, they can still be prey. They can still be devoured by something with wings and talons. Even the revered serpent is not entirely safe. Even the dragon that is worshipped can be eaten. This chapter has traced two very different dragons. In the West and the Near East, the dragon represents chaos that must be violently subdued. Tiamat is butchered. Vertra is shattered. Apep is burned and regenerates only to be burned again. The hero proves himself by destroying the serpent and imposing order on the chaos it embodies. But in India, and in the Buddhist cultures that inherited Indian mythology, the serpent is part of the order. Shesha is the bed of the preserver god. Vasuki is the instrument of creation. Mukalinda is the shelter of the Buddha. These are not creatures to be killed, but powers to be honored, appeased, and in some cases, worshipped directly. The same fundamental shape, the great scaled serpent of impossible size, meant death in Babylon and divinity in Benares. The difference is not in the creature. The difference is in what the culture needed from it. And as we will see, both interpretations, the dragon to be slain and the dragon to be served, would travel west and east, blending and transforming as they went. No dragon in the world has been more beloved than the Chinese dragon. In the West, dragons are monsters. They burn villages, demand tribute, hoard gold in caves until heroes come to slay them. The Western dragon is a problem to be solved, usually with a sword. But in China, for at least 4,000 years, the dragon has been something else entirely, a symbol of power, wisdom, and good fortune. A creature to be celebrated, invoked, and, if you held the throne, claimed as your ancestor. The long, as we noted earlier, bears no etymological connection to the Greek drakon or the Latin draco. It emerged independently, a parallel evolution of the same fundamental shape. But where the Mediterranean dragon watched and waited in darkness, the Chinese dragon danced through clouds, brought rain to parched fields, and became the emblem of the most powerful civilization on Earth for 4 millennia. The Chinese dragon demands veneration, not slaughter. And understanding why requires understanding what the dragon meant to imperial China. The dragon was the emperor, not metaphorically, literally. Chinese emperors claimed descent from dragons, called themselves the son of the dragon, and wore robes embroidered with the 5-clawed long that no one else was permitted to display. Korean vassals wore 4-clawed dragons. Japanese nobles also 4. Vietnamese 3. The number of claws encoded political rank across the entire East Asian sphere of influence, with the Chinese emperor at the apex, wearing the full 5. The association was ancient. Legend held that the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, the mythical founder of Chinese civilization, was conceived when his mother was impregnated by a dragon from the sky. When his work on earth was done, a dragon descended from the clouds and carried him to heaven. Every subsequent dynasty traced its authority through this cosmic lineage. The dragon robe, the dragon throne, the dragon's pearl that represented the emperor's wisdom. These were not decorations, but statements of cosmic legitimacy. To wear a 5-clawed dragon without authorization was treason. In some periods, it was punishable by death. The dragon was not just a symbol of the emperor. The dragon was the legal and spiritual identity of the Chinese state. But the emperor's dragon was only the most powerful of many. Chinese mythology teemed with dragons. The dragon kings ruled the 4 seas from underwater palaces of coral and pearl. Ao Guang, dragon king of the Eastern Sea, commanded the rains and could withhold them in times of displeasure. When drought struck, communities would parade dragon effigies to his shrines, begging for his mercy. When floods came, those same communities built temples to appease his anger. The azure dragon, Qinglong, was one of the 4 symbols of Chinese cosmology, celestial creatures that represented the cardinal directions and the seasons. Qinglong ruled the east and embodied spring, new growth, and the rising sun. He was painted on the walls of tombs to protect the dead, carved into jade to bring good fortune to the living, and mapped onto the stars of the night sky as a constellation. The Chinese dragon had a specific form, one that distinguished it from every other dragon in the world. It had the body of a serpent, but also the horns of a deer, the head of a camel, the eyes of a demon, the neck of a snake, the belly of a clam, the scales of a carp, the claws of an eagle, and the pads of a tiger. This composite form was not invented by accident. It deliberately assembled the most powerful, most auspicious aspects of the animal kingdom into a single being. The dragon was a summary of nature's might. Unlike Western dragons, the long rarely had wings. It did not need them. Chinese dragons flew through the air by swimming, undulating through the clouds as an eel swims through water, riding invisible currents with serpentine grace. The sinuous motion of the dragon dance, still performed at New Year celebrations around the world, imitates this aerial swimming, the long silken bamboo puppet weaving through streets like a river in the sky. At the dragon's heart was a pearl, clasped in its claws or held beneath its chin. This pearl represented the moon, wisdom, or the essence of the dragon's power. Paintings of two dragons chasing a single pearl depicted the struggle for cosmic equilibrium, yin and yang, the eternal dance of complementary opposites. And then there were the 9 sons of the dragon, each born different from their father. Chinese tradition held that the dragon did not breed true. Each of its 9 offspring took a different form and possessed different powers. Bixi looked like a turtle and loved carrying heavy things, which is why stone turtles bear commemorative tablets across China. Qiwen had a fish's head and loved swallowing, so his image guarded rooftops, swallowing fire to prevent buildings from burning. Pulao screamed when struck, and so his form decorated bells. Bian loved litigation, and so he appeared on prison gates. Tao Tie loved to eat, adorning cooking vessels. This taxonomy of dragon children explained why dragons appeared in so many different contexts. The creature on the sword hilt was not the same as the creature on the incense burner, even though both were dragons. The dragon was not one thing, but a family of things, each suited to its purpose. Not all Chinese dragons were benevolent. Yinglong, the winged dragon, was an exception to the wingless tradition, an ancient and powerful dragon who served the Yellow Emperor himself. In one legend, Yinglong created rivers and controlled floods to help defeat the emperor's enemies. In another, he slew a monster called Qiyu by unleashing devastating rains upon its armies. Yinglong was not evil, but he was dangerous, a weapon of mass destruction wielded by the forces of order against the forces of chaos. This proliferation of dragonkin filled Chinese art with serpentine forms. Temple rooftops, bridge pillars, palace walls, pottery, jewelry, weapons, armor. Dragons coiled wherever power, protection, or prestige was invoked. The dragon was not a single creature, but an entire category of sacred beings, a visual vocabulary that permeated every level of Chinese civilization. This brings us to the central question. Why did China revere its dragons while the West feared them? The answer may lie in the element that dominates Chinese dragon mythology: water. The long rules rain and rivers. It lives in the sea and flies through clouds. Its benevolence is measured in agricultural terms. Enough rain to grow rice, controlled floods that enrich rather than destroy. In an empire whose survival depended on managing the vast river systems of the Yellow River and the Yangtze, the power to control water was the power to control life and death. The Western dragon often guards treasure in caves, underground, hoarding, threatening. The Chinese dragon distributes water from the sky, generous when pleased, withholding when disrespected, but fundamentally a power that sustains rather than destroys. The difference is not in the creature's shape, but in what the culture needed from its most powerful symbol. China needed a dragon that blessed rather than burned, and so they made one. This reverence for dragons spread beyond China's borders. As Chinese culture, trade, and Buddhism moved across East Asia, the dragon went with it. In Korea, the yong became a symbol of royalty and wisdom. In Japan, the Ryu guarded Buddhist temples and brought rainfall. In Vietnam, the Rong was claimed as the ancestor of the Vietnamese people themselves. A legend holds that the first king of Vietnam was born from the union of a dragon lord and a fairy princess. We will explore these traditions in the next chapter, but we should note one final thing about the Chinese dragon before we leave. It has never gone away. The five-clawed long still decorates the robes in Chinese operas. Dragon boats still race on rivers during the Duanwu festival. Dragon dances still wind through the streets of every Chinatown on Earth during New Year celebrations. In Chinese, the phrase "descendants of the dragon" is a term for the Chinese people themselves. 4,000 years after the Yellow Emperor supposedly ascended to heaven on a dragon's back, 1 billion people still claim the dragon as their spiritual ancestor. The creature that other cultures killed to prove their heroism, China made the symbol of its civilization. When the Chinese dragon crossed the East China Sea, it transformed. Japan borrowed the dragon from China. The character Ryu is derived from the Chinese long, but the Japanese dragon developed its own character over the centuries. Where Chinese dragons often wore pearl-studded beards and crowned horns, Japanese dragons tended toward a sleeker, more serpentine form. They kept the control over water and weather, but lost some of the imperial weight. The Emperor of Japan was the son of heaven, not the son of the dragon. The dragon in Japan served the throne but did not define it. Instead, Japanese dragons became guardians of the Buddhist faith. The great dragon paintings on temple ceilings, famous examples exist at Kenninji in Kyoto and Tenryuji in Arashiyama, depict the Ryu as a protector of sacred spaces. These dragons watch over monasteries, terrifying evil spirits who would disturb the meditation of monks. They bring rain to the crops of temple communities. They are forces of righteousness rather than symbols of political power. The sea was the dragon's true home. Ryujin, the dragon god of the sea, ruled from a palace called Ryugujo at the bottom of the ocean. There, he kept the Tama, the tide jewels, that could command the waters to rise and fall. In the legend of Urashimataro, a fisherman visits this palace and is entertained for what seems like days, only to return to the surface and find that centuries have passed. Time moves differently in the dragon's realm. Korea took the dragon and made it wise. The Korean dragon, called Yong, or sometimes Imuji in its younger form, carried much from China but developed distinct characteristics. Korean dragons were typically associated with agriculture and wisdom rather than imperial power alone. They were seen as protectors of villages, bringers of rain, and symbols of good fortune. In Korean folklore, an Imuji was a proto-dragon, a great serpent that lived for 1,000 years before ascending to heaven and becoming a true Yong. This concept of transformation, of a lesser creature becoming divine through patience and time, gave Korean dragon mythology a moral dimension. The dragon earned its power through centuries of cultivation. Anyone who endured, who cultivated virtue over time, could theoretically become dragon-like. The creature became a model for spiritual aspiration, not merely a symbol of power. And then there is Vietnam, where the dragon is not merely a symbol, but a literal ancestor. According to Vietnamese legend, the first king of the Vietnamese people was Lac Long Quan, the dragon lord of Lac, who emerged from the sea. He married Ao Ke, a fairy of the mountains. She gave birth to 100 eggs, from which hatched 100 children. 50 followed their father to the coast and became the Vietnamese people. 50 followed their mother to the highlands and became the mountain tribes. To this day, Vietnamese call themselves Con Rong Chau Tien, children of the dragon, grandchildren of the fairy. This is not metaphor. This is national origin story. The dragon is embedded in Vietnamese identity at the deepest level, from the shape of the country, which itself resembles a dragon's body, according to tradition, to the name of the nation's legendary rulers, who all descended from that first dragon lord. The dragons of Southeast Asia blended with the Nagas we met earlier. As Buddhism spread from India through Sri Lanka and into Thailand, Cambodia, and Myanmar, it carried the Naga traditions we explored in Chapter 3. But it also encountered Chinese dragon imagery coming from the north. The result was a fusion. The protective serpent of the Buddha and the rain-bringing Long became intertwined, producing temple architecture where seven-headed Nagas guard entrances and dragon-like creatures wind along roof ridges. In Laos, the Mekong River itself is said to be home to great serpents, the Fire Naga, who cause the mysterious Naga fireballs that rise from the water during October festivals. In Cambodia, the Khmer Empire built Angkor Wat with Nagas as the fundamental architectural motif, their coiled bodies forming bridges, balustrades, and protective guardians. The line between Naga and dragon blurred until they became almost interchangeable, serpentine spirits of water, power, and protection. These Eastern dragons share certain qualities. They all control water, they all bring rain, they all serve as cosmic protectors rather than threats, and none of them needed to be killed for civilization to flourish. Unlike the Mesopotamian creation myths, where dragons must be dismembered to make the world, the Asian dragons were and remain partners in the human project. They are honored, propitiated, and celebrated. They appear in festivals, not in conquest narratives. The dragon that Western heroes needed to slay in order to prove themselves was, in the East, the dragon that blessed crops, protected temples, and founded nations. Same shape, opposite meaning, but there was one place where both traditions lived side by side. We have seen how Japan transformed the Chinese dragon into a guardian of Buddhist temples and a ruler of the sea. But there is another side to Japan's dragon tradition, one that is darker, older, and far more violent. Japan did not only adopt China's benevolent Ryu, it preserved something from an earlier age, the chaos serpent that demands sacrifice, the monster that must be slain for civilization to survive. The storm god had been banished from heaven. Susanoo, brother of the sun goddess Amaterasu, had committed offenses so terrible that even the celestial realm could not tolerate him. He had destroyed rice paddies, defecated in his sister's sacred hall, and thrown a flayed horse through the roof of her weaving room, killing one of her attendants. For these crimes, the gods tore out his beard and fingernails, symbols of his divine power, and cast him down to the earth. He landed in Izumo, a province on the western coast of Japan, where the rivers ran green and the mountains disappeared into mist. And there, walking along the banks of the high river, he heard weeping. An elderly couple sat beside the river, their daughter between them. Their names were Ashinazuchi and Tenazuchi, and they had once been the parents of 8 daughters. Now only one remained. 7 times, they told Susanoo, the serpent had come. 7 years in a row, at the same season, a monster descended from the mountains and demanded a maiden. It had 8 heads and 8 tails. Its body stretched across 8 valleys and 8 mountains. Moss and cypress trees grew upon its back. Its belly was constantly scarred and weathered, as if it dragged itself across the ground, and its eyes burned red as winter cherries. Yamata no Orochi, the 8-forked serpent. This year, it would come for Kushinada Hime, the last daughter, and there was nothing they could do. Susanoo saw opportunity. He was a god without a home, banished from heaven, with no path to redemption. But if he could slay this monster, If he could prove himself a hero instead of a criminal, perhaps even his sister might forgive him. He made his offer. He would kill the serpent. In exchange, he wanted Kushinada Jaime as his wife. The parents agreed instantly. What choice did they have? A daughter married to an exiled god was better than a daughter devoured by a monster. Susanoo then did something unexpected. He transformed Kushinada Hime into a comb and placed her in his hair for safekeeping. She would be invisible to the serpent, protected within his divine form. Then he laid his trap. He ordered the elderly couple to brew sake. Not ordinary sake, eightfold refined sake, yashiori no sake, distilled 8 times until it was potent beyond measure. Then he had them build a fence with 8 gates, and at each gate they placed a platform with a vat of the lethal brew. When Yamata no Orochi came, it smelled the sake. 8 heads meant 8 noses, and the scent of alcohol was irresistible. Each head plunged into a separate vat and drank deeply. The serpent had never tasted anything so strong. Within moments, the 8 heads lay unconscious, scattered across the platforms like discarded things. Susanoo drew his sword. He hacked at the serpent until the high river ran red with blood. 8 heads severed, 8 necks flowing. The monster that had terrorized Izumo for years died drunk and helpless, slaughtered by a god who had nothing left to lose. But as Susanoo cut through one of the 8 tails, his blade struck something hard and shattered. He reached into the flesh and pulled out a sword, a long, curved blade of impossible sharpness that gleamed even in the gore. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. He called it the Sword of the Gathering Clouds of Heaven. Later generations would rename it to the Grass-Cutting Sword. It would become one of the 3 imperial regalia of Japan, symbols of the emperor's divine right to rule, treasures that supposedly exist to this day. Inside a monster's tail, Susanoo had found the foundation of Japanese imperial legitimacy. Susanoo presented the sword to his sister as a gift of atonement. He could not undo his crimes, but he could offer proof that he had become something other than a destroyer. Amaterasu accepted the blade, and while the texts do not say she forgave him, she did not reject the offering. Susanoo married Kushinada Hime. She had remained safe as a comb in his hair throughout the battle, and they settled in Izumo, far from heaven, but no longer in exile. He built a palace there, and according to some accounts, composed Japan's first poem while watching the clouds rise over his new home. The monster slayer became a husband, the exile became a poet, and the sword became an empire. And there were dragons who needed to be killed. In a culture where dragon slaying was almost exclusively the province of gods and men, one story stands apart. Tokoyo was the daughter of a samurai who had been exiled by the ruling Hojo regents. Seeking to find her father, she traveled to the Oki Islands where he had been banished. There, she discovered that the locals were sacrificing young women to a sea dragon named Yofune Nushi. Tokoyo was an ama, a pearl diver, trained from childhood to hold her breath and navigate the deep. She dove into the sea with a knife, found the dragon's lair, and killed it. In some versions, the dragon had been cursing the regent who exiled her father, and by slaying it, she also lifted the curse. Her father was pardoned, the sacrifices ended, and Japan had its rarest of figures, a dragon-slaying woman. The dragons of Japan occupy a unique position in our story. They inherited the benevolent water-controlling tradition of China. You will find dragons carved into temple beams, coiled around water fountains, painted on ceilings where they ward off fire. Japanese dragons protect rather than terrorize. But Japan also preserved the older, darker serpent, the chaos monster that swallows maidens and must be destroyed. Yamata no Orochi is not so different from Vertra, blocking the waters, or Tiamat threatening the gods. Japan kept both traditions alive, the guardian and the monster, the deity to honor and the beast to slay. In doing so, it preserved something essential about the dragon as a category, a creature that can be anything, that can mean anything, depending on what the story needs it to be. But to understand where the Western monster tradition truly took root, we must turn north, to the frozen fjords and burning mead halls of the Norse. At the root of the world, a dragon gnaws. The Norse cosmos was built around Yggdrasil, the great ash tree whose branches held up the heavens and whose roots plunged into the wells of fate. This tree was the axis of existence, the structure upon which all 9 worlds hung. Eagles perched in its crown, deer browsed its leaves, and in the darkness beneath its deepest root, where the dead lay in the cold realm of Niflheimer, a dragon called Nidhogger chewed endlessly at the wood. Nidhogger's name is usually translated as Malice Striker or Curse Striker, and its purpose was destruction. Day and night, year after year, age after age, this dragon gnawed at the root of reality itself. The Norse understood that Yggdrasil was not permanent. It could be destroyed. Nidhogger's teeth were patient, and eventually, given enough time, they would succeed. This is the dragon as entropy, not a monster to be killed by a hero, but a cosmic force wearing away at the fabric of existence. The Norse placed their dragon not in a cave guarding gold, but at the foundation of the universe, working slowly toward the end of everything. And encircling the ocean, a serpent waited. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, was the child of Loki and a giantess. When the gods discovered this monstrous offspring, Odin cast it into the sea, but it did not die. It grew. It grew until its body encircled the entirety of Midgard, the human world, and its jaws found its own tail. There it lay, holding the world together by holding itself in a ring, waiting. Thor, the thunder god, hated the serpent. In one famous story, Thor went fishing with the giant Hymir. He baited his hook with the head of Hymir's largest ox, cast it into the deep, and waited. The line went taut. Something enormous had taken the bait. The world serpent rose. Jormungandr's head broke the surface, venom dripping from jaws that could swallow longships. Thor braced his feet so hard against the boat's floor that his heels punched through the hull and touched the seabed beneath. He raised Mjolnir, ready to end the serpent centuries before they were fated to fight. But Hymir was terrified. He drew his knife and cut Thor's fishing line. Jormungandr sank back into the abyss. They had looked into each other's eyes. Both knew they would meet again. These are dragons of the end times. Unlike the Chinese Long, which blessed, or the Indian Naga, which protected, the Norse dragons exist to destroy. Nidhogger gnaws until the tree falls. Jormungandr waits until the gods die fighting it. These serpents embody the inevitability of cosmic collapse. The Norse did not expect their world to last forever, and their dragons embodied that resignation. Yet there is something almost magnificent in this vision. The dragon is not petty. It does not burn villages for gold. It threatens existence itself, and the gods will fall fighting it. The scale is cosmic, tragic, and strangely beautiful. The dragons will win in the end, and that ending is the price of having lived at all. The Fafnir story gave medieval Europe its template for dragon encounters. A dragon guards treasure in a cave. A hero must kill it to claim the gold. But the treasure comes with a price, a curse, or a test of character that most cannot pass. This pattern appears in Beowulf, written in Old English sometime between the 8th and 11th centuries, where the aging king faces a dragon that has ravaged his kingdom after a thief stole a cup from its hoard. Beowulf kills the dragon but dies of his wounds, and his kingdom falls into chaos without him. These are the dragons we recognize, the hoarding, cave-dwelling, fire-breathing monsters of Western fantasy. They evolved from the Norse worm tradition, passing through Germanic legend into Anglo-Saxon poetry, and eventually into the medieval romances that defined the European dragon for centuries to come. The worm we first encountered in Chapter 1, the Old English word that meant worm, snake, and dragon simultaneously, comes full circle here. Beowulf's dragon is called a worm, so is Fafnir. The linguistic continuity traces a direct line from the earliest Germanic peoples to the dragon that Tolkien would reimagine in the 20th century. And then there is Ragnar Lodbrok, whose very name comes from killing a dragon. Ragnar was a legendary Viking hero, and according to the sagas, a Swedish king named Herod had a beautiful daughter named Thora. He gave her a small serpent as a pet. It grew. It grew until it encircled her bower completely, its body coiled around her home, its appetite demanding an entire ox each day. It was a lindworm, a wingless serpent dragon of Scandinavian legend, and no one could approach Thora without being devoured. Hero offered his daughter's hand in marriage to whoever could kill the beast. Ragnar came to claim the prize, but he was clever. He coated breeches and a cloak in pitch, then waded into freezing water so the pitch froze solid. When the lindworm struck, its fangs could not penetrate the frozen armor. Ragnar drove his spear into the monster's heart. From that day, he was called Ragnar Lodbrok, Ragnar Shaggy Breeches, named for the garment that saved his life and won him a princess, the hero defined by his dragon-slaying gear. What should we take from the Norse dragons? They are dangerous in a way that Eastern dragons are not. Nidhogger will destroy the world. Jormungandr will kill Thor. Fafnir's curse will ruin Sigurd's life. These are not creatures to venerate or propitiate. They are forces of destruction that must be endured, delayed, or, in the case of Fafnir, killed at great cost. Yet the Norse did not hate their dragons. They wrote them into the center of their mythology, made them essential to the cosmic order even as they threatened it. Ragnarok is not merely the end, it is the necessary end, after which a new world will rise from the sea and the few surviving gods will rebuild. The dragon is not just an enemy, it is part of the cycle. Creation and destruction, growth and decay, the tree and the serpent at its root. The Norse understood that you cannot have one without the other. The Slavic dragon breathes fire. Not all dragons do. The Chinese long controls water. The Indian naga coils in contemplation. But when Zmei Gorinich descends upon a Russian village, his 3 heads roaring, flames pouring from each mouth, his 12-foot wings blackening the sky, there is no ambiguity about what kind of creature you are dealing with. This is a monster. This is an enemy. This is everything the Western world feared the dragon to be. Russian folklore presents the dragon as an absolute villain. Zmei Gorinich, whose name roughly translates as Serpent Son of Mountain, kidnaps princesses, demands tribute, burns villages that resist his will. He speaks with a human voice, but shows no mercy. His multiple heads allow him to see in all directions. Cut off one, and 2 more grow back, unless the stump is sealed with fire. He is intelligent, malevolent, and nearly unkillable. This is the dragon as tyrant, and the echoes of Zahak from Persian mythology are unmistakable. Both are serpentine monsters with multiple heads. Both demand human lives as tribute. Both rule through terror. The Slavic lands, which traded and warred with Persia for centuries, may have inherited more than silks and spices across the old trade routes. But the Slavic world was vast, and not all its dragons were wicked. In Serbia, Croatia, and Bulgaria, the Zmaj was a different creature entirely. Yes, he was serpentine. Yes, he was powerful. But the South Slavic dragon could also be a protector, a bringer of rain, a fighter against the evil storms, personified by the malevolent Ayla. Some legends describe Zmaj taking human form to romance mortal women, fathering heroes who inherited their father's strength and fire. This regional variation shows how the same fundamental shape could carry opposite meanings, even within a single linguistic family. The Zmaj of Russia was a monster to be killed. The Zmaj of the Balkans might be a lover, a father, or a guardian of crops. The factor that determined the difference was not the dragon's appearance, but the story the culture needed to tell. The Russian story was one of survival against overwhelming power, fitting for a nation that endured Mongol invasions, harsh winters, and vast hostile landscapes. The Balkan story was one of fertility and alliance with natural forces, appropriate for agricultural communities dependent on seasonal rains. The heroes who fought Slavic dragons were bogatyrs, epic warriors of Russian folklore who served the Prince of Kiev and defended the Rus people from supernatural threats. Dobrynya Nikitich is the most famous dragon slayer among them. In one of the oldest recorded byliny, Russian oral epic poems, Dobrynya encounters Zmaj Gorynik at the Puchai River. His mother had warned him never to go there, never to bathe in those waters, for the dragon ruled them. He went anyway. He bathed, and Zmaj Gorynik rose from the depths in a storm of fire and wind. Dobrynya had no sword, no armor, only his wits, and a hat filled with sand from the riverbed. He threw the sand into the dragon's eyes, blinding it, and beat it into submission with the only weapon at hand. The dragon, humiliated, begged for mercy, and swore an oath never to harm the Rus lands again. But oaths sworn to dragons are worth nothing. Years later, Zmaj Gorynik kidnapped Zabava Putyatichna, niece of Vladimir the Great. Dobrynya rode to the dragon's mountain lair, not by choice, for he knew what awaited him, but by the command of his prince. The battle that followed lasted 3 days and 3 nights. Dobrynya was drenched in dragon blood that rose to his knees, then to his waist. He was ready to give up, to let the blood swallow him. Then the earth itself spoke. "Do not yield, Dobrynya," the land said. "Strike one more blow." He struck. Zmaj Gorynik fell. The maiden was freed, and Dobrynya returned to Kiev as the greatest dragon slayer of the Rus. What should we take from the Slavic dragons? They are transitional figures. They carry the fire-breathing menace that will define the medieval European dragon, but they also preserve echoes of older, more ambiguous serpent spirits. The Zmaj who brings rain is not so different from the dragon kings who control Chinese rivers. The Zmaj who demands tribute recalls Zahak with his shoulder serpents. The Slavic lands connected east and west, and their dragons show it. They are composite creatures, drawing on traditions from Persia, from the Norse, from the Byzantine Greeks, and blending them into something distinctly Slavic. The result is a dragon that can be both villain and hero, depending on which village tells the story and which harvest they are praying for. And westward still, on a small island at the edge of Europe, another dragon was becoming something more than a monster. It was becoming a national symbol. In Wales, the dragon became a nation. The red dragon has flown on Welsh banners for at least 1,500 years. It appears on the national flag to this day, one of the oldest continuously used national symbols in the world, and the only European flag to feature a dragon. Unlike the dragons we have encountered so far, creatures to be slain, worshipped, or feared, the Welsh dragon is something else entirely, an emblem of identity, resistance, and survival against overwhelming odds. How did a fire-breathing monster become the symbol of a people? The answer lies in a legend that intertwines dragons with the very soil of Wales and with the prophets who foretold the nation's fate. The story begins with a king who could not build a tower. Vortigern was a 5th century British ruler, and according to legend, he tried to construct a fortress on a hill called Dinas Emrys in Snowdonia. But every night, no matter how much stone the workers laid during the day, the foundations collapsed. His advisors told him he needed a blood sacrifice, a boy born without a father, killed, and his blood sprinkled on the foundations. They found such a boy, a young prophet named Myrdin, known in later tradition as Merlin. But before they could kill him, the boy revealed the true cause of the tower's collapse. Beneath the hill, he said, lay an underground pool. In that pool slept 2 dragons, one red, one white. Their struggle was shaking the earth, and no fortress could stand while they fought. What did the battle mean? Merlin interpreted the vision. The red dragon, he said, represented the native Britons, the Welsh. The white dragon represented the Saxon invaders who were, even then, conquering Britain from the east. The two would battle for centuries, and sometimes the white dragon would prevail. But in the end, the red dragon would triumph. The Britons would endure. This prophecy, recorded in texts dating back at least to the 9th century, transformed the dragon from a monster into a promise. The red dragon was not a creature to be killed. It was the soul of the Welsh people, fighting for survival against foreign conquest. When Saxon armies swept across England, the Welsh retreated to their mountains, and they carried the red dragon with them. The prophecy has never quite come true in the way Merlin intended. Wales was eventually conquered by England, but the dragon endured. It flew on the banners of Welsh princes. It was carried into battle by Welsh archers at Crecy and Agincourt. And when Henry VII, who was of Welsh descent, seized the English throne in 1485, he marched under the red dragon and incorporated it into his royal arms. The Welsh dragon story appears in multiple medieval texts, including Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain and the Mabinogion, a collection of tales from Welsh oral tradition. In the Mabinogion story of Lludd and Llefelys, the 2 dragons are captured by King Lludd after he lures them into a pit with mead. He buries them at the center of Britain, the location that will become Dinas Emrys, where they sleep until Vortigern disturbs them. What makes the Welsh dragon unique is its political function. Every other dragon we have discussed is either a religious symbol, a moral symbol, or a monster to be overcome. The Welsh dragon is a national symbol, perhaps the first dragon in history to serve this purpose. It represents not cosmic order or individual heroism, but collective identity. To fly the red dragon is to declare, we are still here. We have not been conquered in our hearts. Today, the red dragon appears on the Welsh flag in a posture called passant, walking, 1 foot raised, head turned toward the viewer. It breathes no fire in this depiction. It guards no horde. It is simply present, watching over the land it represents. The dragon that other cultures slew to prove their valor, Wales made into a mirror. Look at it, and you see a people who refused to disappear, who held their language and their identity through centuries of pressure, and who chose as their symbol not a lion or an eagle, but a beast that the rest of Europe considered an enemy. The dragon survives in Wales because Wales identified with the survivor, and that perhaps is the deepest magic a symbol can possess. In Mesoamerica, the dragon had feathers. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was worshipped for over 1,000 years across what is now Mexico and Central America. His name combines Quetzal, the brilliant green bird whose tail feathers were more precious than jade, with Coatl, the Nahuatl word for serpent. He was a god of wind, learning, the morning star, and the boundary between earth and sky. In a land of pyramids that reached toward the heavens, he was the creature that embodied both the ground-dwelling serpent and the sky-soaring bird. This was not a dragon in the European sense. Quetzalcoatl breathed no fire, hoarded no gold, kidnapped no princesses. But he was unmistakably a dragon in the mythological sense, a great serpent of supernatural power, worshipped as divine, central to the creation myths of multiple civilizations. He bridges the gap between the serpent dragons of Asia and the monsters of Europe, proving once again that the scaled serpent of immense power appears wherever humans tell stories about the mysteries of existence. The worship of Quetzalcoatl may be older than the Aztecs themselves. At Teotihuacan, a vast city that flourished from roughly 100 BCE to 550 CE, centuries before the Aztec Empire, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent still stands. Its facade is covered with carved stone heads of the god, surrounded by seashells and wave motifs that connect him to the primordial ocean. The people who built this temple are a mystery. We do not even know what they called themselves. But they worshipped the feathered serpent, and their influence spread across Mesoamerica. The Toltecs, who came after, also revered Quetzalcoatl. So did the Maya, who called him Kukulkan and built the famous pyramid at Chichen Itza in his honor. Twice a year, during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the afternoon sun casts a shadow on the pyramid stairs that resembles a serpent slithering down to the earth. This feat of astronomical architecture shows how central the feathered serpent was to Maya cosmology, important enough to build a whole temple around the movement of his shadow. What did the feathered serpent represent? The answers varied across time and place, but certain themes recurred. Quetzalcoatl was often described as a creator god who, along with his brother Tezcatlipoca, made the world by tearing apart the primordial sea monster, Cipactli. This creation through monster slaying recalls the Babylonian Marduk dismembering Tiamat, suggesting that the pattern we identified in Chapter 2, the dragon as raw material for creation, appeared independently in the Americas as well. But Quetzalcoatl was also, paradoxically, a culture hero, a god who took human form to teach the arts of civilization. In some versions, he invented the calendar, brought maize to humanity, introduced writing and metalwork. He opposed human sacrifice, a striking position in a culture known for its bloody rituals, and was eventually driven into exile by his darker brother, Tezcatlipoca, who tricked him into drunkenness and disgrace. He departed, some legends say, on a raft of serpents, sailing east across the ocean. He promised to return. When Hernán Cortés arrived on the Mexican coast in 1519, he came from the east. He came in ships the Aztecs had never seen, bearing weapons they could not comprehend. And according to some accounts, though scholars debate how much of this is post-conquest invention, Montezuma hesitated to oppose him because the timing and direction matched the ancient prophecy. Was this the feathered serpent, returning to reclaim his throne? We cannot know how seriously Montezuma believed this. The sources that describe his confusion were written after the conquest, by people with reasons to portray the Aztecs as paralyzed by superstition. But the story itself tells us something important. The prophecy of Quetzalcoatl's return was so central to Aztec culture that even Spanish chroniclers felt the need to invoke it. The god who departed on serpents became, in a terrible irony, part of the story of how his people were destroyed. Quetzalcoatl was not alone in Mesoamerican serpent mythology. The Aztecs also worshipped Coatlicue, the serpent-skirted goddess, a terrifying mother figure who wore a skirt of writhing snakes and a necklace of human hearts. She was the mother of gods, including the sun god Huitzilopochtli, and she represented both life-giving fertility and destructive power. The serpents on her body were not decoration, but definition. She was serpent as much as she was woman. Xucoatl, the fire serpent, represented a different aspect of serpent power, a nagual, or spirit form, associated with the sun, with heat, with the fire that drove both creation and destruction. Aztec rulers carried Xucoatl-shaped scepters as symbols of divine authority. The Mesoamerican world was thick with serpents, in temples, in names, in rituals, in the very calendar by which they measured their days. The feathered serpent was the most famous, but he was not a single outlier. He was the apex of a tradition that saw the serpent as the fundamental shape of divine power. We have traveled far from the Greek draken. The feathered serpent shares almost nothing with the European dragon. No fire-breathing, no wings in the European sense, no hoarding, no terrorizing villages. And yet both are serpents of cosmic significance. Both are worshipped or feared by entire civilizations. Both stand at the center of creation myths and heroic stories. The dragon, we are learning, is not a single creature. It is a shape, a long, scaled, serpentine shape that the human mind reaches for when it tries to imagine power too great for any ordinary animal to embody. The feathered serpent proves that this shape appears even in total isolation, among peoples who had no contact with the old world for thousands of years. Wherever humans build civilizations, they build dragons. The question, which we will now turn to address, is what they do with them. We have traveled from Babylon to Beijing to Tenochtitlan. We have traced dragons through every major civilization of the ancient world. But our map has gaps. And in those gaps live serpents as old and as powerful as any we have encountered. Africa, Australia, the Philippines, places where the dragon tradition developed in near total isolation from the Greek draken and the Chinese long. Places where the serpent became something different and something familiar. In the mangrove swamps of West Africa, something watches from the water. The Ninki Nanka is known across Gambia, Senegal, and Sierra Leone. A swamp dragon whose descriptions vary from tribe to tribe, but whose terror is consistent. Some say it has the head of a crocodile. Others describe a horse's head on a giraffe's neck. All agree it is massive, 50 meters long by some accounts, with reflective green-black scales and a crest or feathers on its head. But its most terrifying feature is its gaze. Like the Medusa of Greek myth, the Ninki Nanka kills with its eyes. To see it is to die, unless you carry a mirror. The creature cannot bear to see its own reflection, and the mirror will deflect its deadly stare. Parents warn their children, stay out of the swamps. The dragon is watching. In Dahomey, modern-day Benin, the serpent carried the creator. Aido Huedo is the great rainbow serpent of Fon mythology, and it played a role strikingly similar to the dragons we met in Chapter 2. When Maulisa, the creator deity, moved through the formless void to shape the world, Aido Huedo carried them in its mouth. Everywhere the serpent traveled, mountains rose from its coils and rivers flowed from its tracks. When creation was complete, there was a problem. The world was too heavy. It would collapse under its own weight. So Aido Huedo coiled beneath the earth to support it, biting its own tail to form a ring of stability. When the serpent shifts, earthquakes shake the world. The image is unmistakable. A world-encircling serpent biting its own tail. the Ouroboros of Egypt and Greece, the Jörmungandr of Norse myth. A continent away, a civilization with no contact with the Mediterranean had arrived at the same symbol. But the oldest continuous serpent tradition on Earth lives in Australia. Rock art depicting the rainbow serpent has been dated to between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago, older than the Egyptian pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than the first cuneiform tablets we used to read about Tiamat. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia have been telling stories about this creature for millennia, and they are still telling them today. In the Dreamtime, the creation era that exists both in the past and in the eternal present, the rainbow serpent emerged from beneath the ground. The world was flat and featureless. As the serpent moved across the land, its massive body carved valleys and pushed up mountains. Its coils became riverbeds. The depressions where it rested became waterholes that never dry. The rainbow serpent called forth the frogs. They had been sleeping underground with their bellies full of water, and when the serpent tickled them, they laughed and the water poured from their mouths. It cascaded into the tracks the serpent had left, becoming rivers and lakes and billabongs. Then came the animals, woken by the sound of rushing water. And then came the laws. The rainbow serpent was not merely a creator, but a lawgiver. Those who followed the laws of right behavior were rewarded, transformed into human form, given animal totems, assigned their place in the social order. Those who broke the laws were punished, turned to stone, becoming hills and mountains that still stand as warnings. And in the Philippines, the dragon swallows the moon. The Bakunawa is a sea serpent of immense size, related to the Naga tradition of Southeast Asia, but transformed into something uniquely Filipino. According to legend, there were originally 7 moons in the sky, and the Bakunawa was so enamored of their beauty that it began to devour them, one by one. When a lunar eclipse occurs, the old stories say, the Bakunawa is trying to swallow the last moon. To drive it away, villagers would make as much noise as possible, banging pots, shouting, playing instruments, until the dragon released its prey and the moon emerged from its jaws. It is a practical myth, an explanation for eclipses that doubles as a community ritual. When the moon is eaten, the people fight back together. The dragon becomes an occasion for solidarity. These serpents share something essential with every dragon we have met. The Ninki Nanka guards forbidden territory, like Ladon at the Hesperides. Aido Huedo supports the world, like the Chinese turtle beneath the Dragon King's palace. The rainbow serpent creates and legislates, like Tiamat becoming the raw material of Babylonian cosmos. The Bakunawa threatens cosmic order, like Apep attacking the sun each night. Cultures that never traded, never communicated, never knew the other existed, and yet they all imagined the same creature. A serpent of immense power, a serpent connected to water and creation, a serpent that exists at the boundary between chaos and order. The dragon is not an invention of any single civilization. It is a category of human thought, as fundamental as the idea of divinity itself. Gods kill dragons. We have seen this pattern repeatedly now. Marduk filling Tiamat's throat with winds and shooting an arrow through her heart. Indra shattering Vrtra with his thunderbolt to release the waters of the world. Ra and his companions burning Apep in the underworld journey that must be repeated every night. Thor dying in the moment of his victory over Jörmungandr at the end of all things. The divine dragon slayer is one of the oldest archetypes in human mythology. Before heroes were born, before knights could ride, the gods themselves descended to fight the serpent. And this raises a question. Why does this pattern appear everywhere? Why do so many cultures imagine their highest powers in combat with the creature we have been tracking across the world? The answer, we will argue, lies in what the battle represents. The dragon is not merely an enemy. The dragon is what must be overcome for a certain kind of order to exist. These divine serpent slayers share a pattern. They are almost always storm gods, sky gods, or gods of order. Marduk commanded the four winds. Indra wielded the thunderbolt and ruled the sky. Thor was the thunder itself, and Zeus, who fought the serpentine Typhon for control of Mount Olympus, was the lord of lightning. Even Apollo, who slew the serpent Python at Delphi to establish his oracle there, was a god of light, reason, and the civilizing arts. The serpent, by contrast, is associated with the earth, with water, with darkness, with the primordial state before order was imposed. Tiamat was the salt sea. Vertra blocked the rivers. Python lurked in the cave at Delphi before Apollo made it a place of prophecy. Typhon was born from the earth itself, from Gaia, in revenge for the defeat of her children, the Titans. But there is something else, something darker. The serpent the god kills is often a parent or a close relative. Tiamat was the grandmother of Marduk. He was killing his own ancestor. Typhon was the child of Gaia, who was also the grandmother of Zeus. Even Vertra, in some texts, is called a brother of the gods. The cosmic dragon slaying is not merely a battle against chaos. It is a kind of generational warfare, the new order violently displacing the old. This may reflect something real about how civilizations understood their own origins. The gods who established order were not the first powers. They were usurpers who defeated what came before. The dragon represents the older, wilder, more primordial state of things, and the god who kills it is asserting that the new order has the right to exist at the expense of what preceded it. Creation, in this view, is violent. The world we live in was built on the bones of the world that came before, and the dragon is the memory of that prior world, kept alive in myth so that we never forget what was sacrificed to make room for us. The Greek case is particularly instructive. Zeus's battle with Typhon was, according to Hesiod, the most terrible conflict the cosmos had ever seen. Typhon was a monster of impossible size, with 100 serpent heads that spoke in every language. The voices of lions, bulls, and dogs poured from his throats. Fire blazed from his eyes. His body reached the stars. When Typhon rose against Olympus, the other gods fled to Egypt, transforming themselves into animals to escape. Only Zeus stood his ground, hurling thunderbolts at the monster. But Typhon was not defeated. In one version of the myth, the monster wrapped Zeus in his coils, seized the adamantine sickle the god had used to defeat the Titans, and cut the sinews from Zeus's arms and legs. The king of the gods lay helpless, unable to move, while Typhon hid his stolen sinews in a cave and left him for dead. It was Hermes and Pan, trickster god and wild god, who recovered Zeus's power. They infiltrated the cave, stole back the sinews, and restored them to Zeus's limbs. The thunder god rose again, reinvigorated, and renewed his assault. This time, he would not be disarmed. Zeus drove Typhon back, hurling mountains, until the monster stood at Mount Etna. There, with one final barrage of lightning, Zeus buried him beneath the volcanic peak. Typhon was not killed. He was imprisoned, alive, raging beneath the earth. When Etna erupts, the ancients said, it is Typhon still trying to break free. This is the same theology we saw in Egypt, where Ra must fight Apep every night. Order is not a settled state. It is a daily victory over forces that would undo it. What should we take from the divine dragon slayers? First, that the dragon is important enough to require divine intervention. These are not monsters that human heroes can handle, at least, not yet. In the age of gods, the serpent threatens nothing less than the cosmic order itself, and only cosmic powers can defeat it. Second, that the victory is never quite complete. Tiamat is dismembered, but her body becomes the world itself. She is everywhere, inescapable. Apep regenerates every night. Typhon still rumbles under Etna. Jormungandr will kill Thor, even as Thor kills him. The dragon-slaying story is not a story of permanent triumph, but of ongoing struggle. And third, that the pattern will repeat. What gods do, heroes will later imitate. The divine template, storm god kills chaos serpent to establish order, will become the template for human heroism. The mortal dragon slayer will ride into battle with the blessing of the god who went before. That is the story we turn to next. When gods had shown the way, mortals followed. Sigurd did not face Fafnir in glorious combat. He dug a pit along the path the dragon used to reach its watering hole, hid inside, and waited. When the vast belly passed overhead, scales the size of shields, blocking out the sun, he drove his sword upward through the one soft spot the dragon possessed. Fafnir died slowly, and as he died, he spoke. He warned Sigurd that the treasure was cursed, that it would destroy whoever claimed it. Sigurd took the gold anyway. He roasted Fafnir's heart and burned his thumb tasting the fat. That burn gave him the power to understand the speech of birds, and the birds told him that his companion Regin planned to betray him. So Sigurd killed Regin too. This is not a story of simple heroism. Sigurd wins, but the victory transforms him. He becomes rich, powerful, and increasingly isolated. The curse of Fafnir's gold will pursue him through the rest of his saga, leading to betrayal, murder, and the fall of kingdoms. The Dragon Slayer does not live happily ever after. The Dragon Slayer becomes something of a dragon himself. The Greek heroes faced their serpents too. Perseus, returning from killing the Gorgon Medusa, spotted a princess chained to seaside rocks as he flew overhead. Andromeda's mother had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs, and the sea god Poseidon had sent a monster, Cetus, a creature usually depicted as a vast sea serpent, to devastate the kingdom until the princess was sacrificed. Perseus descended on his winged sandals, brandished the head of Medusa, and turned the monster to stone, or, in some versions, he simply killed it with his sword. Either way, the pattern is clear. Monster threatens innocent victim, hero intervenes. Monster dies, hero claims the maiden. This is the template that will define dragon stories for the next 2,000 years. Heracles, the greatest Greek hero, faced not one serpent, but many. His second labor sent him against the Lernaean Hydra, a water serpent with 9 heads, one of which was immortal. Every time Heracles cut off a head, 2 more grew in its place. He was losing. The monster was multiplying faster than he could destroy it, until his nephew Iolaus began cauterizing each stump with a burning brand, preventing regrowth. Even then, the immortal head had to be buried under a massive rock, still alive, still conscious, still hissing in the darkness. The Hydra was the child of Typhon and Echidna, which makes it the sibling or cousin of nearly every monster in Greek mythology. By killing it, Heracles was continuing the work the gods had begun, subduing the monstrous offspring of the primordial chaos that Zeus had defeated but not fully destroyed. And yet, in a darker version of the myth, Heracles' victory was disqualified. One of the judges of his labors declared that because Iolaus had helped, Heracles could not claim full credit. The dragon cannot be killed alone. Even the greatest hero needs assistance, and even then, the victory is contested. These stories share a common structure. A hero emerges, usually young, often the son of a god or king, marked by some exceptional quality. A monster threatens a community, hoarding treasure, demanding sacrifice, burning fields. The hero confronts the monster and kills it, often through a combination of strength and cunning. And then the aftermath. Treasure claimed, princess married, kingdom secured, but also, often, a price paid. Sigurd is cursed. Beowulf dies. Heracles' victory is disputed. Perseus must continue wandering. Jason, who won the Golden Fleece guarded by a sleepless dragon, was later killed by a beam falling from his own rotting ship. The Dragon Slayer pattern is not about happily ever after. It is about the cost of heroism, about what it takes to impose order on chaos, and about what that imposition takes from the one who achieves it. The hero becomes a hero by killing the dragon, but something in the hero dies too. We have traced the Dragon Slayer from god to mortal. The divine battle established the template: storm deity versus chaos serpent, resulting in cosmic order. The mortal battle humanized that template: hero versus monster, resulting in local order, a saved village, a freed princess, a secured kingdom. But a new element entered with Christianity. When the Dragon Slayer put on armor and picked up a lance, when he began to fight not for treasure or glory, but for God, the story transformed again. The dragon became not merely an enemy, but a demon, and the battle became a crusade. That is where we go next. The most famous dragon slayer in the Western world is a Christian saint. Saint George appears in medieval art more often than almost any other figure outside the Holy Family itself. He rides a white horse, he wears shining armor, he plants his lance in the throat of a dragon while a princess watches from the city walls. The image is so familiar that it decorates the flag of England, the coat of arms of Moscow, the patron symbols of a dozen European nations. But who was George, and where did his dragon come from? The historical George, if he existed, was probably a Roman soldier martyred in the early 4th century during the persecutions of Diocletian. The earliest accounts of his life mention no dragon at all, only his steadfast faith under torture. The dragon appeared later, probably around the 11th or 12th century, and reached its definitive form in the Golden Legend, a collection of saints' lives compiled around 1260. In that version, George encounters a dragon terrorizing the city of Cyllene in Libya. The creature demanded tribute, first sheep, then human beings chosen by lot. When the king's own daughter was selected, George arrived and offered to kill the beast, on one condition: the city must convert to Christianity. The structure is familiar. Monster threatens community, demands innocent victim, hero arrives and defeats it. We saw this with Perseus and Andromeda, with Sigurd and the treasure, with a dozen variations across the cultures we have explored. The medieval dragon slayer story is not an invention. It is an inheritance, a template passed down from pagan antiquity and given a Christian meaning. But the meaning changed profoundly. When Perseus killed Cetus, he won Andromeda as a bride and claimed a kingdom. When Sigurd killed Fafnir, he gained a treasure that would curse him. When George killed the dragon, he gained converts. 15,000 men of Cyllene were baptized, according to the Golden Legend. The princess, sometimes called Sabra in later versions, took a vow of virginity rather than becoming the hero's wife. The Christian dragon slayer did not fight for personal gain. He fought for souls. The dragon was not merely a monster, but a symbol of evil itself, a manifestation of the serpent from Eden, a creature whose defeat advanced the cause of God. In killing dragons, saints performed miracles. George was not alone. The medieval world was thick with dragon-slaying saints. Saint Margaret of Antioch was swallowed by a dragon and burst out of its belly when the cross she carried proved too holy for the beast to contain. Saint Martha tamed a dragon called the Tarasque by showing it the cross and leading it meekly into town, where the villagers killed it. Saint Sylvester sealed a dragon in a pit with a prayer. Across Europe, local saints battled local dragons, worms in the English tradition, lindworms in the Scandinavian, guivres in the French. These stories served a purpose beyond entertainment. When a saint killed a dragon, the message was clear. Christianity was stronger than the old powers. The serpent worship of pagan cults, the nature spirits of pre-Christian Europe, the primordial chaos that earlier cultures had feared, all of it was subsumed under the banner of Christian triumph. The dragon became a stand-in for everything the church opposed, and the saint who killed it demonstrated the church's power. The medieval understanding of dragons was systematic. The bestiaries, encyclopedias of animals that mixed natural history with moral symbolism, devoted careful attention to the dragon. Drawing on the ancient Physiologus and on biblical passages about Leviathan and the serpent in Eden, they described the dragon as the largest of all serpents, capable of killing elephants by constricting them, possessed of a deadly breath and a venomous tail. The dragon's power, they explained, lay not in its teeth, but in its tail, a detail drawn from Revelation, where the dragon sweeps a third of the stars from heaven. This dragon was not merely an animal, it was Satan. The book of Revelation explicitly names the dragon as that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and medieval artists took this identification literally. When they painted dragons, they were painting evil itself. The wings came from demons. The fire breath came from hell. Every feature of the medieval dragon was chosen to embody the Christian conception of what opposed God. This is why the Western dragon, more than any other, is associated with treasure hoards. The dragon sitting on gold embodies avarice, one of the 7 deadly sins. Its fire is wrath, its venom, envy. To kill the dragon was to defeat sin personified. What happened to moral ambiguity? The dragons of earlier traditions could be complex. Fafnir warned Sigurd about the curse, suggesting a creature capable of insight even in death. Tiamat was a mourning mother before she became an enemy. The Chinese dragon was never evil at all. But the medieval Christian dragon had no nuance. It was pure antagonist, absolute evil, the embodiment of everything the hero was fighting against. This simplification served a purpose. In a world where the church taught that reality was divided into good and evil, light and darkness, God and Satan, the dragon provided a convenient symbol for the dark side of that binary. You could not negotiate with a dragon, redeem a dragon, or feel sympathy for a dragon. You could only kill it, and in killing it, prove your allegiance to the forces of light. The hero who killed the dragon was no longer ambiguous either. Perseus's brutality, Sigurd's greed, Beowulf's tragic mortality, these complications fell away. The Christian dragon slayer was a soldier of Christ, pure in motive, righteous in action, guaranteed a heavenly reward. Yet even as the church shaped the dragon into a symbol of absolute evil, something curious happened. The dragon became beautiful. Look at medieval illuminations, at cathedral sculptures, at the dragons coiled around Gothic spires and winding through tapestry borders. These are not crude monsters. They are magnificently rendered, their scales painstakingly detailed, their wings arching with almost architectural grace. The artists who depicted dragons as Satan's symbol clearly loved depicting them. And in literature, the dragon began to acquire personality. In the 14th century poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the hero merely passes by worms and wolves and wadwoes. Dragons are dangers, but they are part of a landscape of wonders. In Renaissance paintings, the dragon's beauty sometimes rivals the saints. The creature that the church tried to make entirely evil kept escaping into ambiguity. It was too interesting, too visually compelling, too mythologically rich to remain a simple symbol of the devil. And as we will see, when the modern age arrived, the dragon would escape Christianity's interpretation entirely. Why do dragons exist? Not in the physical world. We know they don't, and have never discovered a fossil that matches the full dragon form. But in the human mind, dragons are as real as any creature we have ever imagined. They appear in every culture, in every era, in every corner of the world where humans have told stories. They refuse to die. We touched on possible explanations in Chapter 1, David E. Jones's predator amalgam hypothesis, which suggested that dragons are composites of the predators that hunted our ancestors, and Adrian Mayer's fossil hypothesis, which proposed that ancient peoples interpreted dinosaur bones as dragon remains. Both theories have merit. Neither fully explains the phenomenon. The predator theory accounts for the emotional power of dragons, but not their cultural specifics. Why do Chinese dragons control rain, while European dragons hoard gold? Why do Norse dragons gnaw at world trees while Aztec dragons bring civilization? The fear response might be universal, but the stories built around it are not. The fossil theory explains certain clusters of dragon belief, China, Greece, the American Southwest, but not the many cultures without significant fossil exposure that still developed dragon legends. The Inuit had dragons. The Pacific Islanders had dragons. The peoples of the African rainforest had dragons. Fossils cannot account for all of them. Something else is happening, something deeper. Consider the snake. Humans have an unusual relationship with serpents. We fear them more than we fear far more dangerous animals. Studies have shown that both children and adults detect snake images faster than images of other animals. Our visual systems seem primed to spot them. Neuroscientist Lynn Isbell has proposed the snake detection theory, which argues that primate vision evolved specifically to detect serpents, our oldest and most persistent predators. For tens of millions of years, before we were human, before we were even primates, our ancestors lived in fear of snakes. The fear is older than language, older than consciousness, older than almost anything we would recognize as thought. It is built into the architecture of our brains. Now magnify that snake. Give it the size its presence in our nightmares demands. Give it the power that our fear insists it must possess. What do you get? A dragon, not a creature with wings and fire. Those are cultural additions, but a serpent of terrible size, of supernatural power, of ancient and alien intelligence. The dragon, at its core, is the snake our ancestors feared, projected onto the cosmic scale. Carl Jung suggested that certain images recur across cultures because they emerge from what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of human experience that predates individual psychology. The dragon, in Jung's framework, would be an archetype, not a creature anyone invented, but a shape that human minds naturally produce when reaching for symbols of primal power. Joseph Campbell, building on Jung, saw the dragon as central to the hero's journey. The hero must descend into darkness, confront a monster, and return transformed. The dragon is the guardian of the threshold, the challenge that separates the ordinary world from the extraordinary one. It appears in so many myths because the psychological pattern it represents is universal. The fear that must be faced, the obstacle that must be overcome, the darkness that must be entered before the light can be found. This interpretation has its critics. Not every culture frames its dragons as obstacles to be overcome. The Chinese dragon is an ally, not an enemy. The Indian Nagas are divine beings, not monsters. The Welsh dragon is a national spirit, not a personal test. The hero slays dragon story is powerful, but it is not the only story. Perhaps the truth is simpler and stranger. The dragon is a symbol for things that are too large to name directly. When a culture wants to represent chaos, it reaches for the dragon. When a culture wants to represent power, it reaches for the dragon. When a culture wants to represent the forces of nature, flood, drought, storm, earthquake, it reaches for the dragon. The serpentine form is flexible enough to carry any meaning and terrifying enough to make that meaning memorable. The dragon is not one thing. It is a container for whatever a culture most deeply fears and desires. That is why the dragon of China blesses crops, while the dragon of Europe guards gold. That is why the dragon of Indian mythology supports the universe, while the dragon of Norse mythology gnaws at its roots. Each culture fills the container with its own contents, but the shape of the container, long, scaled, serpentine, impossibly powerful, remains the same. And that shape comes from the snake that still lurks in the deepest chambers of the human brain, the predator that evolution taught us to fear before we had words to describe it. But dragons are more than fear made visible. They are also wonder. The awe we feel when contemplating vast scales of power, incomprehensible timelines, forces that dwarf human capacity. The dragon is the dinosaur as myth, the storm as myth, the volcano and the earthquake and the sea as myth. It is nature's sublime terror, given a face we can almost comprehend. And perhaps that is why we keep telling dragon stories. Not because we are afraid, but because we are fascinated. The dragon lets us approach the limits of imagination, to touch the boundary between the knowable and the unknowable, to feel the thrill of cosmic vertigo while remaining safely in our storytelling chairs. It is the shape of our fear and the shape of our wonder, and as long as humans remain human, we will keep imagining the serpent that is too vast to be real and too necessary to forget. The dragon that every modern person knows best came from a professor of Old English. J.R.R. Tolkien was an expert on Beowulf. He had translated it, lectured on it, and written a famous essay arguing that the dragon fight at the poem's end was not a weakness, but its essential climax. When he created Smaug for The Hobbit in 1937, he drew on everything he knew about the dragons of medieval literature. Fafnir, guarding his cursed gold. Beowulf's worm, burning in rage over a stolen cup. The speaking dragons of Norse saga who taunted their slayers even as they died. Smaug is all of these things. He lies on a treasure he stole from the dwarves of Erebor. He speaks, boasting of his armor, mocking Bilbo's riddles, preening in his magnificence. He burns Lake Town in revenge for a theft, and he has a weakness, a single missing scale on his chest, which Bilbo discovers and which the archer Bard exploits to kill him. But Smaug is also something the medieval dragons were not, a fully realized character. Tolkien gives him a personality, a psychology, an almost sympathetic vanity. When Smaug speaks, we hear centuries of accumulated dragon lore filtered through a modern sensibility that asks, what would a dragon actually be like? Tolkien's dragon spawned 1,000 imitators. Fantasy literature, after The Hobbit, became dragon territory. Anne McCaffrey's Pern novels gave us dragons bonded telepathically to human riders. Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea presented dragons as ancient, wise, and speaking in the language of the making. The Dungeons and Dragons game, launched in 1974, put dragons right there in the title and sorted them into color-coded moral categories. Red dragons for evil, gold for good, that have influenced fantasy gaming ever since. Film and television followed. Game of Thrones presented dragons as weapons of mass destruction, creatures so powerful that they could shift the balance of continental wars. Daenerys Targaryen's 3 dragons became the most recognizable images of the entire series, symbols of power that could liberate or annihilate depending on who commanded them. And then, the dragons became protagonists. How to Train Your Dragon inverted the slaying story entirely. Its hero, a Viking boy, befriends a dragon named Toothless and discovers that the creatures his people have been killing are not monsters, but misunderstood neighbors. The film teaches children to question the old heroic narrative, to wonder whether every dragon deserves a lance through its heart. Video games, perhaps more than any other medium, have made dragons a living presence. In Skyrim, the player fights dragons that swoop from the sky, breathing fire and frost, their ancient language capable of shattering stone. In Dark Souls, the dragons are remnants of an older age, creatures of such power that even their ruins radiate danger. In countless games, the dragon is the ultimate boss, the final challenge, the prize that proves the player has mastered the system. And online, dragons have become identity. Avatars and usernames feature dragon imagery. Furry and scaly subcultures have embraced the dragon as a form of self-expression. Artists on DeviantArt and ArtStation produce thousands of dragon illustrations every month, reinventing the creature in every conceivable style. The dragon has escaped the myth. It now lives in our screens, our games, our online identities. It has become something unprecedented, a creature of mass imagination, collectively owned by millions of people who share no culture, no religion, no national identity, only a love for the imagined beast. What have we learned? The dragon appears in every human culture because it taps something universal. The serpent, fear embedded in our neural architecture, the awe we feel before natural forces too vast to control, the narrative need for obstacles worth overcoming. These are the deep roots, but the branches are cultural. China made the dragon a rain-bringing benefactor because China needed rain. Europe made the dragon a fire-breathing enemy because Europe needed enemies. Wales made the dragon a national symbol because Wales needed to survive. Each culture shaped the universal fear into a local meaning, and those meanings have accumulated over millennia, layer upon layer, until the dragon today carries the weight of all of them. Smaug hoarding gold includes Fafnir's curse. Daenerys' fire-breathing includes Marduk's creative violence. The friendly Toothless includes the protective Mukalinda who sheltered the Buddha. Every modern dragon stands on the shoulders of every dragon that came before. And still the dragon keeps changing. Climate dragons have begun to appear in fiction. Dragons as symbols of environmental collapse, creatures awakened by human greed. Political dragons comment on authoritarianism and resistance. Sympathetic dragons challenge the slaying narrative, asking who gets to decide which creatures are monsters. We began in the Gobi Desert. Roy Chapman Andrews returned from the expedition with crates of fossils. The Mongolians still called them long gu, dragon bones, and Chinese doctors had been grinding those same bones into medicine, certain they were treating patients with the remains of actual dragons. They weren't wrong to believe. Not exactly. The bones were real, the teeth were real, the claws that could disembowel a horse, those were real too. What the ancient peoples got wrong was the timing. The dragons had been dead for 65 million years, but the bones remained, waiting in the rock, and when human hands finally pulled them free, those bones demanded explanation. Every culture that found them told the same story. Something vast and terrible once walked this earth. Something scaled, something powerful, something that had to be named before it could be understood. The Babylonians carved it into their gates. The Norse wrote it into the roots of their world tree. The Chinese embroidered it onto the emperor's robes. The Welsh painted it on their flags and carried it into battle against invaders who outnumbered them 10 to 1. Same bones, different meanings, same shape, long, serpentine, impossibly powerful, refracted through 10,000 years of human need. The dragon survives because it does something no other creature in mythology can do. It contains multitudes. It is the monster to be slain and the god to be worshipped, the enemy of civilization and the founder of nations, the hoarder of treasure and the bringer of rain, the chaos that must be destroyed and the order that must be preserved. Depending on who tells the story, the dragon is villain or hero, curse or blessing, death or life. No other mythological creature carries this range. Vampires are always predators. Werewolves are always cursed. But dragons are whatever the story needs them to be. A child in Beijing learns that dragons bring good fortune. A child in London learns that dragons burn villages. Both are taught the truth. And here is what we have avoided saying for 2 hours. The thing that makes the dragon different from every other myth we could have chosen to examine. The dragon is not going away. We have explained the fossils. We have mapped every inch of the planet. We know, with absolute certainty, that no creature matching the dragon's description flies through our skies or swims in our oceans. The mystery is solved. The dragons are extinct, and in fact, were never dragons at all. Just dinosaurs, whose bones outlasted their flesh by epochs. And yet, television series about dragons get millions of viewers worldwide. Video games where you fight dragons sell tens of millions of copies. Movies about dragon slayers become box office blockbusters. Children's books about friendly dragons fill libraries. We put dragons on our flags, our tattoos, our sports jerseys. We name our military helicopters after them. We dream about them. And when we imagine the future, when science fiction writers try to picture what might evolve on distant planets, they keep inventing dragons. Every generation rebuilds it. Every generation inherits the dragon from the one before and adds something new. Smaug inherited Fafnir's greed and spoke with a voice no ancient worm ever had. Daenerys' dragons inherited the Chinese Long's majesty and Tiamat's creative fire. Toothless inherited Mukalinda's protection and added something unprecedented: vulnerability. The dragon evolves, and as long as it evolves, it endures. Somewhere tonight, a child will discover dragons for the first time. Maybe in a book, maybe in a game, maybe in a temple where their grandmother lights incense beneath a carved serpent coiled around a pillar. They will see the long, scaled body, the terrible power, the ancient eyes. And they will feel something humans have felt since the first person pulled a massive skull from desert rock and tried to imagine the creature it had belonged to. Wonder, fear, the knowledge that something existed, or could exist, that dwarfs human scale. The dragon endures because that feeling endures. And when the last human tells the last story, the dragon will be there, coiled in the final sentence, waiting, just as it always has.